Kevin, thanks for coming. The first thing I like to do is I usually start with introductions, so why don't you go first and I'll follow after.
Thank you, Deepak. My name's Kevin Lee. I'm the co-founder and executive chairman of Did It, which has been around 19 years as a digital marketing, technology, and services firm. We started off pure technology and building technology for SEO optimization, search engine optimization, in engines before Google, because we predate Google by a couple of years. And then when paid search came on the horizon, we were one of the really early adopters in bid alerts and bid management and campaign management. We continue to do that to this day. We have our own in-house technology, which we used to license out, we no longer do. But that's probably 50% of our revenues. Another 10% of our revenues, or 15%, is SEO. And we've made 9 acquisitions in the last 5 years to become full service, because after a few big clients left, we decided, as a result of saying, I want a one-stop shop. I don't want to talk to a bunch of different account managers. We said, I guess we have to become a one-stop shop. So we took a bunch of retained earnings and went out on a little bit of a buying spree. And I think we're going to slow down a little bit this year, because we did 4 acquisitions last year, which was a lot. They weren't big acquisitions, but they were a lot. You have to digest each one. In addition to running Did It, which is a hell of a lot of fun, because you're helping clients in a lot of different industries achieve their marketing goals using digital strategies and technologies, but I also run WeCare.com, and WeCare.com is a cause marketing platform that generates money for nonprofits based on online shopping, online searching, and a variety of other online behaviors. If any of you are familiar with Amazon Smile, we inspired Amazon Smile. That's a nice way of saying that they liked it so much they wanted to create one of their own. So that's another fun business. That's about 10 people. Did It is about 104 people. WeCare has generated about $8 million for nonprofits. That's sort of a fun business to be in, because it's like a giving back business. But the underlying foundation of both businesses is technology and strategy.
Oh, great. So my name is Deepak Lalwani. I'm a host of Business and Technology of Greater New York. I work as a management and technology consultant that focuses on change and transformation projects. I started with my own boutique firm in 2014, so I'm slowly but surely growing it. So with that said, let me ask you the first question. What are the most important decisions you make as a leader of your organization?
It's interesting, because I think that the decisions I make day to day are actually sort of just a more macro level set of decisions, and the kinds of things I tell my team to make, most important of which is prioritization, right? Almost everybody in my companies has an endless to-do list. And so getting the prioritization right is key. And having some way, I don't care if it's Post-it notes on a board or napkins with crayons or whatever you use to keep track of your prioritization, is key. So that's, I think, a pretty important role I play with the organization, and what I spend a fair amount of my time doing, certainly from the product roadmap and general strategy perspective. I also spend a fair amount of time thinking about our own marketing strategies and our own positioning within the industry. And having been around 19 years, we've had to sort of transform ourselves 6 or 7 times during that period. And I guess we've been fairly lucky so far that we always saw far enough into the future that we were able to adapt and change. And so that, I think that's another critical part of what I do running the company. Luckily, I've got a great business partner with whom I only agree 50% of the time, and that's the best part of it, because unless you can have an argument, the truth doesn't really rise to the surface.
And that's a good segue to the next question. What do you look for when you're building a team, including your partner?
I would say the highest common denominator of what I look for when building a team is pure raw intelligence combined with the right personality for that particular role. what I found, for example, in the technology side, and a lot of you guys come from the technology side of businesses, is that, you know, once that sort of core level of skill is in place, then intelligence becomes much more important than the fact that you can have a buzzword on a resume. So I'll give you an example. At one point, I had 4 physicists working for me. Well, why did I have 4 physicists working for me? Well, these days in physics, you got to code. You can't be a PhD in physics. You can't work at the CERN Collider without coding. So yeah, I have one of the former CERN Collider PhD postdoc people who worked for me for 2 years because he was brilliant. He would hurt my brain when he talked, and that was good, right? I mean, so for me, I didn't care the fact that he didn't have a CS degree. I knew that being a physicist and working with big data, he would have to know how to code. And even if he didn't know the languages that my team preferred, you know, his learning curve would be completely different than anybody else's learning curve. He'd be like up to speed in 48 hours in some cases with certain things. He's like, oh yeah, I know object-oriented programming, I know C, I know Python. Oh, this is different, it's PHP, I'll figure it out. So for me, sort of raw intelligence is key, but it has to be combined with the right personality fit for the organization. And I think that's even more the case for me with WeCare, because WeCare is sort of a giving back kind of a company. And I make hiring decisions in a very different way for those 2 companies. WeCare is much more of you have to impress a quorum at WeCare in order to be sort of accepted by the team when they get hired. So sure, I do like the second interview. Sometimes the first interview is somebody on my team, and then they're like, oh, this person's worth talking to. Then I'll talk to them, I'll vet them, and then it goes back out to the team because they need to get a consensus. If they're going, it's a small enough team, they want to get a consensus that the personality fit is right, just not a skill set or buzzword on the resume basis. So just as an aside for those of you who are involved in the hiring process, for example, you know, I really urge an email interview because whether you're communicating, you know, inside Asana or through Slack or through Instant Messenger or through email, the ability for somebody to communicate is critically important. So I have weeded out candidates that looked great on paper just by the fact that we couldn't have an email conversation. I asked them a bunch of questions and they didn't answer them correctly. Not that there was always a right answer or a wrong answer, but you get a tremendous amount of insight into an individual when they communicate with you via email. And if you think that both on an internal basis and on an external basis, if they're client-facing, it's even more important. But even on an internal basis, if they can't communicate, it creates friction in the organization, slows things down.
Yeah. So that's physicists-who-do-code.com. Is that right? Does everyone have that physicist? Okay.
Now, don't let the secret out. I mean, you know, there are not that many physicists out there, so let me have first pick.
Who has been your biggest influence and how have they affected you?
You know, I would say, obviously, you know, my dad is probably my biggest influence on me. But after him, right, and everything he instilled in me during my formative years, I have to say my business partner, right? I mean, he's a very different person. It's like one of those yin-yang kind of things where, you know, we have a certain amount of overlap in the Venn diagrams, but there's enough difference between us personality-wise, style-wise, skill-wise, et cetera. You know, so we both have MBAs. That, you know, he was originally a chemist. I was originally an economist, and we both got MBAs. So the MBA doesn't really matter because that's just the fundamentals of business. But he comes at things from a different direction than I do. And I'm the mad scientist in the organization, so it's important that I have somebody to counterbalance me and say that's a really dumb idea. We shouldn't bother trying to develop that. So Dave's been my business partner, Dave Pasnak's been a big influence on me because I attempt to learn the things that he's great at that I'm not, but I also realize the fact that, you know, certain things come naturally to him the same way that he realizes that certain things come naturally to me.
Given you're an online advertising authority, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing technology leaders today?
Let's see what I thought about it earlier today. So some of you may be from the startup ecosystem, some of you may be from sort of the Fortune 1000 or Fortune 5000. I think one challenge from the perspective of technology leaders and technology decision makers right now is the fact that so much angel and venture money has poured into technology solutions to problems that it's muddied the waters for anybody trying to make a decision around anything. So it used to be when there were only like 2 or 3 choices that you had, you just, you could at least talk to a few people and get an opinion. So 15 years ago, if you needed a CRM platform, you had like 3 choices. Right now, if you need a CRM platform, you have 40. That is not a good position to be in as somebody trying to decide what CRM platform to use. If you needed a database, it used to be like Oracle, DBM, and a couple of others, right? And those were your choices. Now you got Postgres and Mongo and Hadoop and all these choices that obviously different ones are structured very differently. Some are SQL, some are non-SQL, et cetera. But the point is the proliferation of choice has really complicated everybody's lives. If you happen to be the one providing one of those choices, it's made your selling job and marketing job that much more challenging. And if you're one of the ones deciding on it and how to advise clients on it, it's made it a lot more complicated because they'll be like, hey, what about Zoho? You're like, yeah, that's a possibility. Oh yeah, well, we're really into social, so how about Nimble, which is social CRM. It's gotten a little bit muddied out there.
One quick question. I do feel like James Lipton from the Actor Studio. You guys do that. So weird. Where do great ideas come from in your organization?
We strive to have them come from every level. That's not always possible because an account coordinator may not be comfortable voicing their idea, especially not directly to me on their 3rd week on the job. But we try to make sure that the good ideas percolate up from the bottom, because we recognize that regardless of the executive team and how savvy they are,
sure,
and how smart they are, the people who are down in the trenches doing the stuff day to day, they're going to be an important part of the product roadmap. They're going to be an important part of the strategy roadmap as well.
2-part question. How do you see technology's place changing in your company in the next 3 to 5 years? And what are you doing to prepare for it?
I think there's going to be an increasing migration to cloud-based computing,
sure,
for ourselves and our clients. We're pretty heavily cloud on the edge servers, but we still have got some legacy technology that sits on hardware we control. It's because it's not always easy to port everything over, with no coding to a cloud environment. But that said, I think that's going to be sort of pervasive, and I think a lot of our clients are going to be struggling with that. They're going to be struggling with big data.
Okay.
And where does the big data sit, right? Who owns the big data? Where does it sit? Does it sit, in the case of digital advertising, for example, at a DMP, which is, on Terry Kawaja's Lumascapes, if you're familiar with Terry over at Luma Partners, he's got a whole category of DMPs, which are data management platforms, that's all they do. It's collect the data, collect marketing data, make it available from a decisioning perspective and a reporting perspective. So who's going to own that, right? And to what extent are technologists going to be involved in that? I see that as being pretty transformative. The other thing for us, given the business that we're in, which is using technology to help market and sell better, it's really about applying technology to elements of our clients' businesses in ways that they wouldn't have thought of themselves because they don't live in the digital world. It's not second nature, right? They're not digital natives. Depending on the age of the decision makers, right? They may be very non-digital natives, printing out their emails to read them and things like that, or they may be they may be a little more digital native, and at least understand a little bit of how they should integrate their business processes into the digital world. And as we've done some of our M&A into sort of more antiquated sectors, we've even looked, even those that have sort of already embraced digital, we always try to take it one level further. So when we bought 2 digital direct mail companies to do customized color laser where everything is commingled together and QR codes and pearls are being merged into mailing, we've said, well, I think we can take this a step further. I think we can push the envelope even more, using big data, using the ability to append information on, that kind of thing.
I once did some consulting work for a financial services firm where the executive had to have her MS Outlook emails printed out by the admin assistant.
Right.
I don't know if that executive is around anymore, but that's what.
No, that's absolutely true. I guess one other challenge that I think the industry faces is sort of because of the technology skill shortage. Right. I'm really hoping that sometime over the next couple of years we finally get a reasonable visa and immigration policy in place for the PhD students that I get on OPT training for 12 to 18 months, and then I got to ship them back overseas and then get yelled at for outsourcing my tech, right? I mean, I don't outsource much of my tech at all, only in emergency situations. If it's a very compartmentalized project, I'll give it to an overseas coding team. But generally, I would much prefer to leave things onshore than offshore. And I just feel like, that's probably like $1 billion worth of tax revenue that's just missing because we can't keep the tech talent here. Even though they come here to get their master's degrees and PhD degrees, some of them get H-1Bs, some of them don't. Or some of them get married to American people and get to stay that way, but they don't have a whole lot of options. So maybe there should be a dating site for like students and PhD comp sci students, because you could fund that by the employers. Like I'll pay for their profiles and I'll even pay for their photo shoot so that they look fairly dateable. So I don't know how we're going to solve it in the interim, but I hope that the government finally does realize that all this tax revenue is missing.
All right, so last question before we go to the audience. What advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time?
I think you really need to be able to telegraph passion for what it is that you do as a company, your product or your service, as well as the willingness to sort of do whatever it takes, right? So people do not respect managers that tell people to do stuff that they wouldn't be willing to do themselves, right? And in some cases, in sort of the old school world, in a lot of businesses, you don't have any choice, right? You manage a restaurant, guess what? You're going to be washing dishes sometimes, right? And your team knows that you'll wash the dishes if the dishwasher comes, calls in sick, because you're the manager. That's what managers do. And I think to some extent that holds true, without the organization. So you don't get respect as a result of your title. You earn respect as a result of the way you carry yourself within the organization and the way you interact with your staff, right? And nobody does a perfect job at it, but I think that's just something to keep in mind, is that if you're passionate about the business, passionate about the vision of your company, and you're sort of got the I'll do whatever it takes attitude, and people know that you're sort of working your tail off right alongside them, I think that counts a lot towards the success of the company as a whole.
Let's open it up to the audience. A couple of questions for the audience. Anyone for Kevin Lee of didit.com and WeCare.com? I've got some partners that would totally vomit over that idea, but tell us more about that.
I like to craft. I haven't even fully sold my HR team at Did It on the email interview as a critical step of how to remove people from the queue. But I think I'm able to remove people almost immediately after a well-crafted email interview. So on my computer, in certain folders, I've got my sort of pre-written email interview questions by role, right, that I've over the years sort of tweaked. And while some of them are very obvious, just based on the role that the person's applying for, others are very open-ended and a little bit confusing or ambiguous. And you want to see what they do when they get an ambiguous question. So for example, one of my favorite questions on email interviews is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how geeky are you? Right? Now, when I ask a coder or a potential coder to answer that question, they just give me either a snarky answer or an exact number with a decimal point. And they don't have any additional information at all. 7.8, on to the next question, right? If they're a liberal arts major and they're in for a marketing position, I'll get 4 paragraphs. I'll get 4 paragraphs of, well, when you said geeky, did you mean nerdy and socially awkward, or did you mean the technologically savvy? Because I really do think I'm technologically savvy, so on that scale, I'm a 9, but socially retarded, no, absolutely not, I'm a 2. But I didn't know what you meant, and so I wanted to make sure I articulated that, and again, blah, 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 and it goes on, sometimes for paragraphs. And it's just fascinating because already you can sort of see that obviously these two people couldn't do each other's roles, right? Because just by the answer to that question alone, they think differently, right? And they interact differently. And it ends up being one of my favorite questions, just because of the fact of how people, when they do choose to add some kind of a qualifier to the number, how they phrase that gives you almost insight into their soul, right? I mean, it really tells you who they are. Sometimes if they just answer 7.8 and they move on to the next question, you don't get a whole lot out of that question. But it also, that alone tells you something, right? So, I spend a fair amount of time crafting those questions, and I try to ask a mix of questions which are obvious to the role. Like if it's a coding role, I'm like, hey, what changes in coding languages and technology are you excited about, and why, right? And then, I don't really care if they say, something, that's sort of Node.js, right? Or if they say, Python, or if they say, I don't really care what they say. It's really more just how they communicate about it. I mean, obviously, if they say something completely retarded, I get nothing to do about it. But
disqualified.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good disqualifier. So I'm a firm believer in email interviews because it saves everybody a whole bunch of time and energy. Because you don't want the person coming in and wasting, 2 hours of their day, and you certainly don't want them wasting, even 5 minutes of your time. What I find hard to get across to some of my team members is, it's okay to cut the interview a little short, right? If you're like 3 sentences in and this is not a go, find a way to graciously exit, because you don't need to spend another 20 minutes talking to this person if you've pretty much disqualified the person in the 3rd sentence. So it's really hard for a lot of people to do that. Like, they're too nice. They're like, the person came all the way in, they live all the way out in Greenpoint, they came into the city for this interview, I'm going to give them my time. Well, their time is really valuable. Don't give them your time. I mean, if they're not a fit, that's okay. They'll find something else. Don't waste both of their time. So that's another sort of HR-related issue.
I mean, Kevin, if I interview We Did It, I'm going to have to give you a phone call. I'm just going to have to pick up the phone and call you.
It's very different by industry sector. Stuff can come in and blindside a company, out of nowhere, and the pace of change is accelerated. So, back when we all were on BlackBerries, we would have said like BlackBerry is golden for a while. You would not have expected them to be pretty much out of business within 5 years.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you're never going to be perfect in anticipating changes. I think you sort of have to place your bets, and sometimes you only have enough cash to place one bet, and that's really dangerous, right? Because you could bet wrong. So if at all possible, if you can place 2 bets, your odds increase. So, you know, in the way that's translated into Did It is while we, you know, try to stay just behind the bleeding edge on the advertising, technology, and marketing automation side of our business, on the M&A side, we're often acquiring companies that are completely antiquated in the way they do business because we can be their digital daddy. We can bring them up to where they need to be to make their business better. And it's worked out okay.
Thank you for coming. Kevin Lee of didit.com and
Thank you.
wefair.org. Thank you very much.